So page 485, I'm going to start reading at line 414. I think I'll read to the end of the canto. We'll see how far we get. This passage that we are reading now, this is the vision or the dream that Savitri is having, that is showing her, revealing to her the cosmic past, the course of evolution up to the human level. This is the first part of her search for her soul, when she looks inside to find her soul. The first thing that comes is this dream, which reveals to her the whole course of the past of the universe. And what we were reading about recently was about man, how all the world's possibilities are hiding in man, sleeping in man, as the tree sleeps in its seed. And he showed us first the outer nature that we are familiar with, but then he said this is just a first view. We have a larger, deeper inner self. And we read about that last week. The experiences that come, the soul acts, influences us, the inner mind dwells in us in a larger light. Wisdom approaches, we may see the face of wisdom. And we have within us a life self that is much more powerful than our surface life. And even we have a subtle physical self, a subtle self of the body, which is dreaming. It is dreaming dreams for the future of the body. And these dreams, he says, are bright shadows of the thoughts of God. That's where we stopped last time. In the prone, obscure beginnings of the race, the human grew in the bowed, ape-like man. He stood erect, a god-like form and force, and a soul's thoughts looked out from earth-born eyes. Man stood erect. He wore the thinker's brow. He looked at heaven and saw his comrade stars. A vision came of beauty and greater birth, slowly emerging from the heart's chapel of light, and moved in a white, lucent air of dreams. He saw his being's unrealized vastnesses. He aspired and housed the nascent demigod. The occult seeker into the open came. He heard the far and touched the intangible. He gazed into the future and the unseen. He used the powers earth instruments cannot use, a pastime made of the impossible. He caught up fragments of the omniscient's thought. He scattered formulas of omnipotence. Thus, man in his little house, made of earth's dust, grew towards an unseen heaven of thought and dream, looking into the vast vistas of his mind on a small globe dotting infinity. At last, climbing a long and narrow stair, he stood alone on the high roof of things and saw the light of a spiritual sun. Aspiring, he transcends his earthly self. He stands in the largeness of his soul, newborn, redeemed from encirclement by mortal things, and moves in a pure, free, spiritual realm, as in the rare breath of a stratosphere. A last end of far lines of divinity. He mounts by a frail thread to his high source. He reaches his fount of immortality. He calls the Godhead into his mortal life. All this the Spirit concealed had done in her. A portion of the mighty Mother came into her as into its own human part. Amid the cosmic workings of the gods, it marked her the center of a wide-drawn scheme, dreamed in the passion of her far-seeing spirit, to mold humanity into God's own shape and lead this great, blind, struggling world to light, or a new world discover or create. Earth must transform herself and equal heaven, or heaven descend into earth's mortal state. But for such vast spiritual change to be, out of the mystic cavern in man's heart, the heavenly psyche must put off her veil and step into common nature's crowded rooms and stand uncovered in that nature's front and rule its thoughts and fill the body and life. Obedient to a high command, she sat. Time, life, and death were passing incidents, obstructing with their transient view her sight that must break through and liberate the God imprisoned in the visionless mortal man. The inferior nature, born in ignorance, still took too large a place. It veiled herself and must be pushed aside to find her soul. Which way are we reading? This way? Yeah.
In the throne, obscure beginnings, the race, the human grew in the bowed apple like man.
Let's pause. 2 lines. Now he's introducing the topic in a new way. The evolutionary story that we know, no? In the obscure beginnings of the human race. Obscure means dark and dimly lit, no? And he says the beginnings of the race were prone, as if we were lying down on the ground, still crawling, not grown, standing up. In the prone, obscure beginnings of the race, the human consciousness gets prepared in the bowed, ape-like man. We've seen these pictures, of them, and the evolutionary stages. There's this being who stands erect, but he's still bowed down. But in him, the human being is preparing.
He stood erect, godlike form and form, and the soul's thoughts looked out from earth-born eyes. Man stood erect. He wore the tingless brow. He looked at heaven and saw his comrade stars. A vision came of beauty and great above, slowly emerging from the heart's chapel of light, and moved in the wide, lucent air of dreams.
So there's a time when really the human race manifests and stands up straight. And the human form is, Mother has said it, it is a kind of archetypal form, a godlike form. People have had an intuition of that at certain periods of human history. Of course, we still have a lot of animal characteristics, so we are a mixture of animal and God. But when the human form appeared on earth, it was a godlike form and a much greater strength of force, much greater control over the environment. It's like in the Bible where God makes Adam, the first man, to rule over all the lower forms, give them names, look after them, look after the garden. And out of these eyes, they are eyes that are born from earth, from matter, but the thoughts of a soul can look out of these human eyes, see the world and perceive it and think about it from the soul. When man stands erect, he wears the thinker's brow. We think this is something typical of the developed human being. If there's a brow, it shows, reveals the power of thought. This is the brow here. And from the beginning, man looked up at the skies, at heaven, and he saw the stars, and he felt that those stars must be his comrades, his friends and companions, that they have some connection with him. And even those very early men, they had a vision of beauty and a greater birth than this material human birth. They thought that there is a process of development slowly emerging, coming out of the heart. And the heart is seen as a chapel of light. A chapel is a very simple little church. So it's a place where, in a very, very simple and humble way, the divine is worshipped. And so his human consciousness is moving in a lucent air, an air that's full of light, that's even white, integral and pure, the dreams, the first dreams of humanity.
He saw his being's unrealized vastnesses. He aspired and holds the nascent demigod.
Yes. So there's, from the beginning, there's a perception in humanity that we are not just this little being, but that we have much vaster parts which have not yet been realized. And so the human being, man, aspires for higher things, and in himself he houses the nascent demigod. Nascent means something that's being born. Sometimes we talk about the nascent moon. There's been no moon, there's been new moon, and we see the very first little crescent of the first nascent moon, the moon beginning to be born and to grow. So within us there's a demigod, a half-divine being that's growing, being born in us. Sergei.
Out of the deep recess of the cell, the potent seeker into the earthen flame. He felt the far and touched the intangible. He gazed into the future and the unseen. He used the powers Earth's instruments cannot use, the pastime made of the impossible. He caught up fragments of the omniscience thought. He scattered formulas of omnipotence.
Yes. Out of the dim recesses of the self, from the inner being. A recess is a part of the room that is set back, an alcove or a small area that's more private than the main room. So in our self, in our inner being, there are such dimly lit rooms connected with the main part of our body. There, in those rooms, the occult seeker came out into the open. So it seems that from the very beginning of our human evolution, human beings have been exploring, seeking, trying to find things out. And they have invented and made things. These even sound like modern inventions, hearing the far through a telephone, and touching the intangible somehow at a distance. Intangible is what can't be touched. There's something in us which gazes into the future and wants to explore what we can't see with our physical eyes. We investigate the unseen. And man uses powers the earth instruments cannot use. We have powers beyond what our senses can tell us, our physical senses. We have powers of reasoning and intuition that can take us beyond just what the earth instruments use. And he says that man has made a pastime of the impossible. A pastime is something that you do for fun to pass the time. So it seems that humanity always likes, human beings like a challenge. If something seems impossible, it is exciting and fun for them to be able to achieve what is impossible. And man catches up fragments of the omniscience thought. The omniscience thought is all-encompassing. Man grasps little fragments, little broken pieces of that vast thought. And he scattered here and there, he spreads formulas of omnipotence, all powers. Perhaps these are scientific formulas, mathematical formulas, and chemical formulas, and the formulas of physics that give man power in the world. Tatiana.
That man in his little house, made of earth's dust, grew towards an unseen heaven of thought and dream, looking into the vast vistas of his mind, and a small globe darting infinity.
It's a very nice sentence, isn't it? Yeah? Here we are in our little house, our physical bodily house. It's just made of the dust, the atoms of the earth. But in our being, in our true being, in our consciousness, man has grown towards, in the direction of, an invisible heaven of thought and dream. Here we are, here is man on this small globe, this little globe of our earth, which is just a dot in the vast infinity, the boundlessness of the material universe. But he can look even into vast vistas, inwardly, in the mind. Joel.
At last, climbing along a narrow stair, he stood alone on the high roof of things and saw the light of a spiritual sun.
So this is a development that comes about, no? Becoming aware, climbing up, and even realizing higher levels of consciousness. Having to climb up a long, narrow stair, it's not an easy thing to do. He reaches the high roof of things, the highest planes of the manifestation, and he can see the light of a spiritual sun, the sun of the spirit. This has all happened in evolution. Yes. You'll read?
Aspiring with transcends his all he said, He stands in the largeness of his soul, newborn, redeemed from
encirclement
by mortal things, and moves in a pure, free spiritual realm, as in the rare deep of a stratosphere.
Yes, we'll pause there. So with the power of aspiration, he transcends, he goes beyond his earthly self. He is able to release, achieve the liberation of the soul. He stands newborn. It's the second birth, no? When the soul becomes free. When that happens, he's redeemed, he's set free from encirclement by mortal things, that domination of everything that is perishable, material. The soul becomes free of all that. And then it can move in another realm, not just this material realm, but another realm, pure, free, spiritual realm. And he says that's like moving in the rare breath of a stratosphere. The stratosphere is part of the Earth's atmosphere. It's the highest part of our Earth's atmosphere. And if we went there, we would not be able to breathe that atmosphere. We need the other elements that are closer to us here. Even if we go up a mountain, a high mountain, you have difficulty in the Himalayas, you have difficulty in breathing because the air is rarer. It is more subtle, more thin up there. There's less of the elements that we need. Basically oxygen, I think, no? So a stratosphere is a very high, pure, fine atmosphere. Ganga Lakshmi.
The last end of far line of divinity, he mounts by the frail thread to his side source. He reaches his fount of immortality. He calls the Godhead into the mortal life.
To his mortal life, yes. A last end of far lines of divinity. So the spiritual man is a kind of highest achievement of lines of development that have been going on. No? And he was standing on the high roof of things, but he can go even higher than that. He can follow a frail thread. Frail means not strong. A frail thread. He can mount all the way up to the transcendent, to his high source, to the consciousness of the One. He can reach the source of his immortality, of his immortal being. And when he can do that, he can also return into the mortal life, into the human body, and bring that, his own immortal divine being, he can call the Godhead into the mortal life. That's the goal of Sri Aurobindo's yoga, that we should find ourselves and unite with our source, and then that high source can use the individual, the formed individual, and the body here on earth to act here and change things here. Yes.
All this the Spirit conceived had done in her, a portion of the mighty mother came into her as into its own human part. Amid the cosmic workings of the gods, it marked her the center of a wide-drawn scheme, dreamed in the passion of her far-seeing spirit to mold humanity into God's own shape and lead this great, blind, struggling world to light, or a new world discovered or created.
Yes. So this is Savitri's experience. No? She realizes that in herself she's followed this whole path of human evolution. The hidden spirit has done all this in her, no? The concealed spirit. And now, with this birth, what has happened is that a portion of the mighty mother, the supreme divine mother, has joined herself to this human birth, has come into her as into its own human part. So there are the two parts. There's the human part and there's the divine part. But they've come together, they belong together, they are united. So, amid the cosmic workings of the gods, the universal workings of the universal powers, the powers that are working towards the light, she has been marked as the center of a wide-drawn scheme, a vast plan. And that portion of the mighty mother which has chosen her, Savitri, as the center of this plan, that portion dreams in her. She, Savitri, has this far-seeing spirit, and that divine portion in her dreams in that far-seeing spirit. It dreams of molding, shaping humanity into God's own shape. It dreams of leading this great, blind, struggling world to light. Or if that is not possible, if the world will not respond, then to discover a new world, or if necessary, to create a new world. Gumsun.
Earth must transform herself and be called heaven. All heaven descend into Earth's immortal state.
This is again to show one of these short formulations of Sri Aurobindo's teachings. No? Either this material world must be transformed and become equal to the free higher levels of consciousness, or those higher levels of consciousness must come down here into matter, into Earth's mortal state, and transform it here. No? Perhaps these two things both have to happen, help each other to happen. So how can it happen, Joy?
But for such vast spiritual change to be, out of the mystic cavern in man's heart, the heavenly Shishe must put off her veil and step into common nature's crowded rooms and stand uncovered in that nature's front and rule its souls and fill the body and life.
Yes. So for this vast spiritual change to come about, this earth becoming transformed, something has to happen. And that depends on humanity. Out of this mystic cavern, this mysterious secret cave in man's heart. The presence that is there must come out into the open. In the deep cave of the heart is dwelling the heavenly psyche. This is the soul. We're here with a capital P. This is the Greek word for soul. She's there, she's veiled and hidden. She must take off the veil and step out into the open, into the crowded rooms of common nature, into everyday life. And she must stand there revealed, uncovered, in the front as the leader of the common nature. She must become the ruler of its thoughts, and it must fill the body and the life. This individual transformation is a necessary condition for the transformation of the whole. And Savitri feels that this is her duty and her mission.
When you speak about psyche, it's like the soul. So the soul, the heavenly psyche, can also be the psyche of the human. It's different from the heart. It's something connected with the soul more than
we are told that the seat of the soul is somehow behind the heart center. So the way to find that mystic cavern is to go deep into the heart. The heart is our emotional center, and it should be the center of our higher feelings and emotions. And so for many people, that's the easiest way to reach the soul, through the purified emotions, feelings. Suresh.
Obedient to a high command, she said. Time, life and death were passing incidents, obstructing with the transient view her sight. Her sight that must break through and liberate the God, imprisoned in the visionless mortal man.
Yes. So she sits there in concentration, obedient to a high command. No? She's been told, that's now what you have to do. You have to find your soul. So she's obedient to that high command. And as she sits there and looks, she sees that all these outer experiences of time and life and death, even rebirth, these are just passing incidents. They're things that happen and then they are gone. And their transient view, their way of looking at things from the point of view of something that is coming and going, it is obstructing her sight, her inner sight. She has to use that inner sight to break through all the barriers and set free the God, the divine being that is imprisoned in the mortal man, in the human being, who doesn't have that power of vision. Savitri has to use her vision to liberate the power of soul inside the human being.
The inferior nature born into ignorance still took too large a place. It viewed herself and must be pushed aside to find her soul.
Yes. So the inferior nature, the lower nature, the earthly parts, no? Body, life and mind, this has been born into the ignorance. She's a human being, she's carrying all that inferior nature with her, and it's still taking up too large a place in her consciousness. It's veiling her self, her true self, hiding it, no? So that inferior nature must be pushed aside in order to find her soul. So that's what we find happening in the next few cantos, in Canto 3 and Canto 4, and in Canto 5, that is called the finding of the soul. And that is then only the first step. It's a very big, very important, immensely powerful step. But she has another 2 steps to take before she's ready to take up her mission of saving Shraddhavan, the soul of humanity, from the grip of ignorance and death.
What I understood in this country is that there is a shape, there is a plan, which is that she cannot not do it, cannot success actually to do this, because she is missions to do and she knows how to do. She has just to follow actually to do the job, the work to do.
Yes.
It is foreseen that she will succeed. I understood this in Shraddhavan.
Yes, but you see this canto is called the parable of the search for the soul. In order to succeed, she has nothing to succeed for herself. No, she is already free. She's accepted to come and do this for human beings. So she has to follow this whole path that ordinary evolutionary beings have to follow. And that is what is described in this book of yoga.
Because she has done it with Shobindo's word, maybe humanity is saved, already saved, no?
Well, the seed of that fulfillment has definitely been done. But how hard Mother and Sri Aurobindo worked, what they toiled, we cannot even begin to conceive what they have done to give us the opportunities that we have today, that we also don't really grasp what opportunities we have. When we read the Life Divine, he tells us who we are, no, and what we should be able to do. But the inferior nature born into the ignorance still takes too large a place. So Savitri is showing us how to push that aside, find the soul. Then we will be able to collaborate with that great work, that great process.
How this title of this canto is parable of the search for the soul?
Yes, that's a very intelligent question, Bhavana. Thank you. Yeah. Why is it called the parable of the search for the soul? A parable is a little story. It's a little story with a meaning, a moral. It is illustrating something. I think the reason why this canto is called the parable of the search for the soul instead of just the search for the soul is that what I was just saying to Joy, that in a way Savitri is already in touch with her soul, she's already guided by her soul. But in order to fill this particular mission that she's come to do as a human being, she has to show us the way, she has to go through the whole process that we have to go through. So this is a little story which is showing us the way, something like that. Yeah? So next week we'll take up the entry into the inner countries. So we can read these lines together from line 414. In the prone, obscure beginnings of the race, the human grew in the bowed ape-like man. He stood erect, a god-like form and force, and a soul's thoughts looked out from earth-born eyes. Man stood erect, he wore the thinker's brow. He looked at heaven and saw his comrades' stars. A vision came of beauty and greater birth, slowly emerging from the heart's chapel of light, and moved in a white, lucent air of dreams. He saw his being's unrealized vastnesses. He aspired and housed the nascent demigod. Out of the dim recesses of the self, the occult seeker into the open came. He heard the far and touched the intangible. He gazed into the future and the unseen. He used the powers earth instruments cannot use, a pastime made of the impossible. He caught up fragments of the omniscient's thought. He scattered formulas of omnipotence. Thus man, in his little house made of earth's dust, grew towards an unseen heaven of thought and dream, looking into the vast vistas of his mind on a small globe dotting infinity. At last, climbing a long and narrow stair, he stood alone on the high roof of things and saw the light of a spiritual sun. Aspiring, he transcends his earthly self. He stands in the largeness of his soul newborn, redeemed from encirclement by mortal things, and moves in a pure, free, spiritual realm, as in the rare breath of a stratosphere. A last end of far lines of divinity, he mounts by a frail thread to his high source. He reaches his fount of immortality. He calls the Godhead into his mortal life. All this the Spirit concealed had done in her. A portion of the mighty Mother came into her as into its own human part. Amid the cosmic workings of the gods, it marked her the center of a wide-drawn scheme, dreamed in the passion of her far-seeing spirit, to mould humanity into God's own shape, and lead this great, blind, struggling world to light, or a new world discover or create. Earth must transform herself and equal heaven, or heaven descend into earth's mortal state. But for such vast spiritual change to be, out of the mystic cavern in man's heart, the heavenly psyche must put off her veil and step into common nature's crowded rooms, and stand uncovered in that nature's front, and rule its thoughts, and fill the body and life. Obedient to a high command, she sat. Time, life, and death were passing incidents, obstructing with their transient view her sight that must break through and liberate the God imprisoned in the visionless mortal man. The inferior nature, born into ignorance, still took too large a place. It veiled herself and must be pushed aside to find her soul.